Good afternoon. I'm Ed Pozzuoli, CEO of Tripp Scott, and today we are truly, truly honored to have the former four-term Congressman from Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi was a candidate for the Democratic nomination in 2020 and has since moved from the Democratic Party to independent. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I do want to mention she's a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, and I want to thank you for your service on that front as well.
I'm grateful to serve. Thank you, Ed.
Well, talk about service. One of the things that you put together is this book, For the Love of Country.
Yeah.
And I found it a fascinating read because you highlighted some key issues.
Yeah.
You also explained the transition from where you were, where the Democratic Party was and where you think it is today. Tell us about why you wrote the book.
You know, when I announced that I was leaving the Democratic Party, it was about 6 weeks before the 2022 election, and I was pleasantly surprised to see how many people I was hearing from, total strangers from across the country, sending me notes, sending me direct messages on social media, just saying that they related so much to my brief outline of the reasons why I left the Democratic Party. And how they were so glad to have someone speaking up for them, because in this age of cancel culture, they didn't feel like they could speak the truth for themselves. And also to know that they're not alone.
Right.
You know, when you look at a lot of what we see, whether it be on social media or we see on, you know, mainstream cable news, network news, you kind of feel like, well, they're all saying things that don't make sense. Am I really alone? You know, they seem like they're the crazy ones, but what's really going on here? And so this book is both for people who recognize that our country is headed drastically in the wrong direction, but feel politically homeless and aren't quite sure what to do with that. And it's also for those who already see what's happening, know the truth, recognize the root cause of the problem, but have other people in their lives who they know may not hear the message the same way from them as they would from someone who's been a Democrat for over 20 years and walked away.
So one of the themes in the book is this constitutional framework and
Yes.
individual liberties, and it seems as though Democrats a bit ago were champions of individual liberties, free speech, and did all those things that were focused on allowing people to express themselves in whatever way they felt from an individual standpoint. They seem to departed from that. You make that point.
Completely. And this is what's at stake right now, this year in 2024 in this election, are those fundamental freedoms. And in each chapter of my book, I go into how the Democrat elite are endangering us and our freedoms in kind of some of the most foundational ways. But when you look at, for me, the party that I joined, I was 21 years old in Hawaii, and I saw a party that celebrated free speech and civil liberties, a party that worked with the ACLU at that time to defend free speech for everyone, even abhorrent speech, evil speech. And then you fast forward to today where, the ACLU says they will only defend speech that they agree with, and a Democratic Party that is led by people who expect and enforce total compliance or else face the consequences. So you're either using the talking points or they will find ways to target you or smear you, silence or cancel you. And this is not the Democratic Party I joined, but when you combine that mindset with the tools and the levers of power that they have at their disposal through our government and through their friends in big tech and the big propaganda media, then you see the dangerous place we are in right now, where people are easily silenced and canceled for saying things that are quote unquote misinformation or disinformation. Who gets to decide what that is? It's the Democrat elite who are in charge.
One of the things you make a point of is that the Democratic elite is using the federal government and the levers of the power of the federal government to go after political opponents, like President Trump as an example. You spend a great deal of time on that, and it's very interesting. Why do you think, how do we get to where we were and to where we are now, where the FBI and the DOJ are being used as weapons?
This thing that has become a more common term now, this Trump derangement syndrome, I think it began in 2016 when the Washington establishment, and this included leaders in the Republican Party as well, in the beginning during that campaign, they saw him as a threat to their power, the power of the Washington establishment. And you look at what Hillary Clinton did in weaponizing her friends in the FBI against President Trump, just during the campaign itself, the Steele dossier and other means. You look at what they did throughout his presidency to try to block him from enacting the policies that he told the American people he was going to do. And then you look at what we're seeing now in this election, where you took things that were maybe a little bit more indirect to now very directly using the Department of Justice and law enforcement to go after Trump, keep him tied up in a courtroom, charge him with everything they can possibly imagine, draining him of time and resources and keeping him off the campaign trail, but also targeting everyday Americans, people who President Biden has painted a target on their backs by saying these are MAGA extremists and they're the greatest threat to our democracy. He basically gave license to anybody and everybody to go after them because they are the quote unquote bad guys. Why? Because they didn't support him or they don't support his woke policies. The dangerous thing, and why I focus on this so much in the book, is that whether people like Donald Trump or don't like him is not really the point here at all. The point is that if we, the people, allow this precedent to be set, this will become the new norm in America, and we will be no different from a banana republic or a dictatorship in some other country where whatever party is in power, the norm is that they will then use that power to go after their political opponents.
I also found it fascinating in your book that you talk about war being used as a way to erode personal liberties.
Yes.
Very interesting. Expound on that a little bit.
When we look throughout history, and I talk about going all the way back to World War II, growing up in Hawaii, there are some historic Japanese internment camps.
Right.
So we grew up knowing that history and actually personally getting to know people who were Japanese Americans who had their lives immediately uprooted and thrown into these internment camps. And you look at different examples since then where this abuse of power takes place that tells us, the American people, you either have to choose between security or liberty. And that if you want to be secure, if we are to have a secure nation, you must cede your liberties and freedoms to the government, who obviously has your best interest at heart.
Yeah, and
I say that with dripping sarcasm.
Yeah, and obviously was foretold because you quote Benjamin Franklin on there, right?
Of course, and this is the thing, we saw it with the Patriot Act after 9/11. A lot of people don't know that many of the measures that they included in the Patriot Act were things that the intelligence community were trying to pass for decades, that would have allowed them, authorities, to be able to see more and more about what we do. Basically, have an incursion on our privacy. And Congress at that time in both parties said, no, this is unconstitutional. So they saw the opportunity because of the terrorist attack on 9/11 to get these measures included in the Patriot Act. We've seen it most recently with this extension and escalation of the FISA bill that allows warrantless surveillance of Americans. And every single time it's done, even some of my Republican friends in Washington who talk about protection of civil liberties, when it comes right down to it, they say, well, we have to choose between security and liberty, and I don't accept that choice. It's a false choice, and we should not accept it.
Do you think the issues that you raised in the book are around either, whether it's personal, individual liberties or erosion of the counting on the family or religion as a base, do you think those issues are going to be front and center when it comes to election time in November?
I think they are already becoming front and center. We just had in Hawaii. Hawaii, we're the most remote island chain in the world.
Beautiful place.
And so, that comes with challenges, but it's also kind of nice because you're a little bit removed from some of the chaos that's happening on the mainland sometimes. But we're just seeing, for example, an increase in the number of biological boys entering and competing against girls in high school sports, and leaders in our state saying that they're not going to do anything about it because, quote unquote, diversity. So I think more and more people in the country are starting to feel the direct consequences on themselves and their families and their kids of these threats to our family, the foundation of the family, the foundation of our freedom and our ability to express ourselves as we choose, to worship as we choose, our ability to live in safe communities.
Right.
These are things that even those who hate politics and who don't ever like to watch the news, that you can't deny what's happening. And so I think these will be driving factors in this election.
One last point, since I have a little bit of an affinity for education and what's going on college campuses today, the nature, like in Columbia University up in New York, in my lifetime, I would have never thought that would ever happen, particularly there. How do you think that plays in the election?
You know, at a basic level, obviously, if you have students and faculty in these Ivy League schools, people are paying a lot of money, and kids are not safe as they're trying to go to class, or they're being blocked because they're Jewish. These are things that I think people across party lines find completely unacceptable. And the fact that President Biden took 9 days before he uttered a peep about what was going on there, it just shows that not only a weakness and a failure of leadership, it is yet another direct consequence of these anarchist policies that this administration and the Democrat elite are pushing forward. There's a deeper threat there, what we're seeing coming out in the campuses that I'll just mention briefly, because it has to do with education. What happens when we raise an entire generation of young people who have not been taught from a very young age and throughout their K through 12 experience about the value of the Constitution, the importance of our God-given rights and freedoms that are enshrined in these founding documents, and how that makes us who we are as Americans? Well, you end up with college students who are repeating lines being propagated by a radical Islamist terrorist group, Hamas, latching on to that ideology because they're not rooted in a superior ideology that makes the foundation of our country, which is the ideology of freedom.
So one last question. What does the future hold for you?
I don't know specifically. I do know, I am seeking more and more opportunities to make a positive impact for our country and to be in a position where I can help tackle solving these very serious threats to our country, both domestic and foreign.
Well, I want to thank you for the fight that you brought on these issues and for being a true American. And thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
Tulsi Gabbard, thank you so much.
Nice to talk to you.